A new era is starting at Tottenham Hotspur. The Thomas Frank era. It is this morning being confirmed that Thomas Frank will be taking charge of Tottenham. He will be the new manager. It's been "here we go" by Fabrizio Romano, and I'm excited about it. I really, really am personally. I know a lot of people are still holding on to the emotional attachments with Ange Postecoglou, and that's completely fair. I completely understand that, and it's all still very raw. He was only sat last Friday, but hopefully in this video I'm going to get you a little bit more excited about Thomas Frank. We're going to be talking about the potential systems that he could be using next year, the profiling of certain players. I haven't actually included any new signings in this video, and I'm going to talk about that in a video maybe tomorrow or the day after. If you'd like to see that, let me know in the comments section. That would be appreciated. But we're going to look at the here and now, which players we've got in the current squad, how he could look to use them, which sort of systems he could look to use, which players I think will thrive under him, and like I said, just hopefully get a bit of a good feeling going around Thomas Frank. That's the aim, and yeah, let's get straight into it. Now, the first thing to note with Thomas Frank is that obviously at Brentford he predominantly played a back five system. There were times when he switched to a back four at home against weaker opposition. I think that he showed as a manager that he's incredibly tactically flexible during his time at Brentford, and I think that's shown this season with some of the results that they've had at home against teams lower down in the table. They've really been a lot more expansive, played a four at the back at times, but I think he played a five at the back the majority of the time. A lot of the times where people watched him as well, watched Brentford as well against the bigger sides, because that just suited them better. It suited the quality of players they had in the squad. It suited the profile of players they had in their squads. At Tottenham, again, I think he'll be flexible, and I think he'll switch between systems. I don't think it's so much to do with the formation on the pitch and just how he thinks it's best to set up against certain oppositions, and that makes me excited. I think the best managers in the world are tactically flexible, are tactically adaptable, and I actually think that's something Ange Postecoglou got unfairly labelled as at points. I think he was a bit more flexible than people gave him credit for, but this is the first sort of draft I've given Thomas Frank and what I think his potential lineup could be if he walked through the door and had a game tomorrow and he started a back four with the current players that we got in our current squad. And just to go through it briefly, Vicario in goal, Van der Ven, Romero. Obviously, there's big rumours about Romero leaving. For now, I'm having him in the team. Pedro Porro, Destiny Udogie, Lucas Bergwijn, Bentancur as a double pivot in there, which I think is just so much more suited to Tottenham's midfield profiles that we've got. Playing a lone six was kind of a little bit suicidal at times under Ange Postecoglou, in my opinion. A double pivot suits us so much better, as you even saw in the Europa League final, for example. James Maddison in that 10, could be Dejan Kulusevski as well. I think he'll rotate between those two in there. Could even look to get them both in the team at times, of course. Matisse Tell off the left, who's going to sign permanently. We don't know if Sonny's going to be here next season, but I think even if Sonny is there, I think he should play a lesser role in the team, more appearances off the bench. I don't think he's going to be starting 38 games next season. I think Matisse Tell is somebody who is going to nail down that left-hand side. I want to talk about him in a bit too. Wilson Odobert off the right, just because I think Odobert sort of suits this front three better than a Brennan Johnson does. Somebody who can hold their whips a little bit more, with Pedro Porro not flying forward and overlapping as much as Destiny Udogie likes to do, and he likes to come inside the pitch a little bit more, as we know, and sort of hang around this area, and Odobert pushes out and is closer to the touchline. I just think as a profile he fits that a bit better than Brennan Johnson, but I think Brennan Johnson will be used heavily under Thomas Frank, and I think it could be a case of Odobert on the left with Johnson out on the right, or Mikey Moore on the left with Johnson out on the right, for example, when Johnson does play, and that's absolutely fine too. But I think the exciting thing about Frank is how he profiles players and how he platforms players to get the absolute maximum out of their ability. It's what he's done at Brentford throughout his entire time there. I mean, if you look at players like even Johan Visser, Mikkel Damsgaard this season, Christian Norgard, Matthias Jensen's a player I've always loved. He's got the absolute maximum out of players who you wouldn't necessarily say are, you know, some of the best in their positions in the Premier League. But Johan Visser, I mean, the improvement in his game over the last 2 years has been ridiculous, to the point where he's now a 20-goal-a-season striker in the Premier League. That is just nuts. And if you told someone that about Johan Visser when he first signed for Brentford, they would not have believed you. And that's what I'm excited about with Frank. I think he's going to get the absolute best out of some of these profiles. In goal, I mean, you know, it doesn't really matter. Goalkeepers are not going to change much tactically. Thomas Frank is somebody who likes to build out from the back. At times, he's also somebody who likes to go long at times. I think that suits us. We can build out from the back very effectively with Romero and Van der Ven there on the ball, with Pedro Porro there as well, with these two dropping in between the centre halves as well to receive the ball. But we can also go long to Dominic Solanke. He's shown so often at Tottenham Hotspur just how brilliant he is at holding up the ball. Players running in beyond him, somebody like Mathias Tell would work so well and so nicely. Again, I'm going to talk about Tell in a second because I'm bloody excited about him. But Mickey van der Ven and Cuti Romero, I think, you know, it will be a less exposed defensive system, absolutely. There'll be a much stronger structure in place than there was under Ange Postecoglou, absolutely, especially as you saw at times last season. Now, look, Ange did get unlucky with the injuries at times. At times you could have blamed him as well. He's had injuries everywhere he's gone, absolutely fair, but hopefully we'll have less injuries under Thomas Frank, because it's a less sort of extreme philosophy and an extreme system, and Van der Ven and Romero will be slightly better protected, in my opinion. Again, I think Van der Ven will still have to go out and defend the wide channel, same with Romero. I do still think there'll be quite ambitious roles for Porro and Udogie, which I like as well in this system. You know, we are Tottenham, and at home especially, we need to be pinning teams back. We need to be dominating the ball. You know, that is just how Spurs need to be at home with the quality that we've got in this squad, and to get the best out of these profiles. And I think Frank will recognise that, and that's why, especially at home against weakened opposition, I think we'll play lineups that look a little bit like this, and four at the backs. Whereas maybe away from home against some of the bigger sides, you know, you could look to use a 3 at the back. Thomas Frank, again, he's tactically flexible, which I love about him. And Van der Ven, Romero, Udogie and Pedro Porro. I think with Pedro Porro, I think Rico Henry is somebody who I see not exactly identical to Udogie, but quite similar profile-wise, in terms of somebody who has great physical qualities, who likes to get on the overlap, who's got a decent low cross into the box, not amazingly technical though, and sort of excels in really carrying the ball too. Rico Henry was that sort of outlet on the left-hand side for Brentford. I think that might be quite similar to how Destiny Udogie is used over there. Ignore the numbers as well, by the way. These are just completely random numbers. And Pedro Porro, I think there's a clip of Thomas Frank talking about Pedro Porro having Trent-esque qualities, and I think Frank will understand and recognise the quality that Pedro Porro has on the ball. It's almost impossible not to, and I think that he will absolutely use Pedro Porro in the most effective way possible. I think you'll have him operating in these sort of spaces here, right around here, getting crosses into the box. I think you'll have him inverting in build-up as well, playing those switches up to Dominic Solanke, playing those passes into James Maddison in between the lines. And I think he'll use Pedro. I think Pedro Porro will be one of Thomas Frank's favourite players. I also think Jed Spence will get plenty of game time under Thomas Frank as well too. I think Thomas Frank, again, is somebody who values those physical capabilities, those defensive capabilities, and I think, again, he adapts to his opposition. I think you'll see a lot of Jed Spence in games where we might have less of the ball. Say we're going away to Anfield. I think you could absolutely see Jed Spence getting a lot of game time in those bigger games when we need to be more defensively solid, and when we need somebody who is a 1v1 specialist. And Jed Spence has shown that he can be a 1v1 specialist in defensive situations. He's shown that against Mo Salah this season, at times against Liverpool, and he's shown that against other top wingers too. And I think that's something that Thomas Frank will definitely look to use. The midfield and attack is where it starts to get really interesting, in my opinion. Like I said, I think he's definitely going to go with that double pivot in there. I think he's done that throughout his entire time at Brentford, playing sort of Christopher Norgard. Is it Christopher Norgard or Christian Norgard? I can't actually remember, but Norgard, regardless, playing in that sort of number 6 role with Matisse Jensen next to him as more of a creator. And I think we don't have that number 6 profile like a Christian Norgard, which is why I've been so vocal about the fact that I'd love to sign a profile like a João Paulinho, a Leslie Okachukwe from Chelsea. I don't think Chelsea will actually sell to us, but maybe if we put in a decent enough offer. And he's been brilliant on loan at Southampton this season, despite the fact they got relegated, one of the shining lights in that side. But say we had a João Paulinho in here, is a different sort of profile, a real destroyer, a number 6 type, to play alongside a Lucas Bergvall or Rodrigo Bentancur. That would be a lovely profile to add into the squad. And apparently he's available for around 30 million euros this summer, so definitely a profile like that could help, especially in this sort of system in a double pivot. But a double pivot of Bergvall and Bentancur has enough for me, and you could even throw in a Bissouma there. Bissouma and Bentancur have showed that they can play together. Bissouma is still at the club next season, but the double pivot there of sort of the two creators, both so good on the ball, but both, I think, offer enough defensively to be able to play together in there. And I think Thomas Frank will have them, set up really, really well out of possession too, again, to protect Mickey van der Ven, to protect Romero, and have that system. Again, I feel like this system is probably slightly more suited to playing a lesser quality side at home in the Premier League, or away from home in the Premier League, where we're dominating a little bit more of the ball, because there's no doubt that Bergvall and Bentancur are definitely better on the ball as opposed to off the ball. James Maddison in the number 10 as well, like I said earlier, could 100% be Dejan Kulusevski. I think he's going to love both of those profiles. I think he's going to love James Maddison especially, and he's going to have him in sort of those Mikhail Damsgaard type pockets. I think you'll see a lot of James Maddison picking up the ball in between the lines, playing a little bit higher up than he maybe did under Ange Postecoglou. Under Ange, he would drop a lot deeper in to get the ball at times. He'd sort of have a lot of freedom to roam. I think he'll have freedom to roam under Frank a little bit too, but I think he'll want to get Maddison as much as he possibly can into those pockets where he's going to really, really hurt teams. And I think that's where I want to see James Maddison too. And I think he'll also have James Maddison running in behind off Solanke too, as we saw Mika Damsgaard do a lot this season, sort of running in behind and finding those little pockets of space in the penalty area and popping up with important goals and assists. Damsgaard was excellent at that this season. I think that midfield three will work very nicely. I think, again, against better opposition, maybe away from home, even at home, I think Pat Matasar will be an option that he looks to use in there 100% for that leg, for those legs, for that sort of work rate, for that little bit more defensive cover potentially. A Yves Bissouma in there, like I said, signing somebody like a João Paulinho or an Ugo Chukwu to play in that midfield too. I don't think Bentancur and Bergvall is the best in terms of protection when we are not dominating the ball against those top sides. If we're going away to the Etihad, for example, a midfielder Bentancur and Bergvall would scare me a little bit. But like I said, it's going to be lovely to have those options and lovely to sort of know. And again, this isn't like shots at Ange Postecoglou. I think Ange did this to a decent level as well at times at Spurs. But it's nice to know that we've got a manager who's going to be slightly more adaptive and be somebody who profiles his players well enough to sort of change things week on week. And I think it will be a real squad game under Thomas Frank. And I think that he had a fairly small squad at Brentford, and at times you saw that did affect them. Early exits in the cup rounds, for example, they never had a decent cup run because the priority seemed to always be on the Premier League, which is absolutely fair enough. With Brentford, it was survival every year, and they did that with no fuss every single year as well, which was obviously incredibly impressive. But I think with a deeper squad, that will only enhance Frank's capabilities as a manager 100%. Then up front, I don't think Dominic Solanke will be like the primary goal scorer in this Thomas Frank system. I don't think that's necessarily what Solanke is going to be at Tottenham Hotspur. I think he's going to be a little bit more of a facilitator, somebody who drops in a little bit deeper, who has James Maddison, who has Dejan Kulusevski, Matisse Tell, Odegaard, Johnson, whoever it will be, running in off him, running on behind him. And I think he'll be used in sort of not quite the Ivan Toney role, but there'll be a lot of similarities between how he's used Ivan Toney in the past and how he uses Dominic Solanke. I think they've got, quite a few similar characteristics in terms of quite good in the air, those flick-ons. I think he'll definitely use that when we go long from Vicario or long balls from Pedro Porro or Cuti Romero, And I think Dominic Solanke will be used for that. I think he'll be used a lot as a hold-up strike. He is so good with his back to goal, it's a joke. And I think Frank will maximise those capabilities and have players making really smart movements off him. And I think that's just going to enhance Dominic Solanke's game. But I don't think Solanke is going to be the type of player who scores 20 goals a season in the Premier League under Thomas Frank. I think he'll maybe get 10, 15 goals and be contributing regularly. But I think a lot of his good work will come in sort of enabling others, running in beyond him to score goals, to create opportunities for them. And I think it's going to be a really, really exciting role that Dominic Solanke has next season. To be fair, not too dissimilar at times to how we saw him under Ange Postecoglou, really doing his best work back to goal, facing away from the opposition's goal and bringing other players into play. Matisse Tell is somebody who was profiled completely wrong under Ange Postecoglou. He was playing out wide as a touchline winger at times. He was playing as a number 9, trying to fill in for the role Dominic Solanke did. You need to get Matisse Tell in these spaces here, in those sort of half spaces, in between the lines, in there. Matisse Tell is somebody who's so good at getting separation from his defenders, getting shots off quickly, ball striking ability. This is where you want him, in and around the penalty area. And I just think he was misprofiled. He's not a touchline winger. He's not somebody who's going to go at a defender 1v1 relentlessly and sort of win fouls, create opportunities from that way. He's going to get in these spaces. He's going to find those little pockets. He's going to get in the box. He's going to be a nuisance. And Matisse Tell is going to score goals in this Thomas Frank system. I promise you that. I think, like I said, again, if we are maybe playing a system where we're more under the cosh and we need a winger to drop back in here and to sort of help us out 1v1, you might look to go for a Wilson Odegaard off the left. You might look to go for a Mikey Moore. And again, I think Moore and Odegaard will both get good levels of game time under Thomas Frank too, especially in the cup competitions, I think. But Matisse Tell, in terms of this system, when we're playing teams at home, like I've banged on about in this video, I think you'll see him operating in these spaces, and I think you'll see him become incredibly effective. And again, I think Thomas Frank will improve Matisse Tell and really platform him to show his best at Spurs. And I think Tell will thrive under Thomas Frank. Somebody that I think might struggle a little bit more under Frank might be a Dejan Kulusevski. I don't think he'll struggle under Frank. I think that's going a little bit too far. But I just think he's going to love James Maddison. I think when James Maddison is fit, I think he plays in this Frank system. And I can't really see him loving Kulusevski as a sort of winger in his system, as a sort of wide forward in his system on this right-hand side. And I think Dejan Kulusevski could be somebody who, you know, Thomas Frank comes up with something completely different for them. And I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see where Dejan Kulusevski is used and how he's used in this system. Other players that I think could struggle a little bit more in this system. I think this is kind of the beauty of Thomas Frank. I'm looking at it thinking, I think that he could look to get the best out of pretty much every player in this squad. I really do. I know that sounds maybe a little bit too idealistic or whatever, but time will tell, and I'm sure that we'll see players that are unhappy and don't get as much game time under Thomas Frank, I'm sure. But Wilson-Odobert on that right-hand side too could be a nice option out there. Like I said, I don't think a front three of Tell, Johnson and Solanke necessarily works the best. I think where that kind of front three could work would be in this sort of system. Now, I've drawn up this kind of thing in a 5 at the back. 5 at the back is not a negative, and 5 at the back is something that if we can switch to, and if that's an option for us, that's a major positive for me. And I think we've got the players and the profiles in our squad to really suit this system. If you look at our fullbacks, both of these have played wing-backs at times during their career, and I don't think they're necessarily better as wing-backs, but I think in terms of qualities that they could use, I think Pedro Porro and Destiny Udogie, if you're looking to bomb on, if you're looking for both of them to overlap and sort of you're playing, I've still got Wilson-Odobert in the system, but pretend that's Brennan Johnson. You've got Brennan Johnson, Matisse Tell, sort of getting in there at the back post, getting into these half spaces, poaching in and around the penalty area. That could be hugely exciting too. And I think it really suits the back three as well. Kevin Danso is a player I love, who I think is going to get plenty of game time under Thomas Frank too, and has shown that he's easily good enough to be starting for Tottenham Hotspur, and somebody who will be great defending the wide channels with his pace and his athleticism that he's shown at Spurs. Romero, again, stepping out of this area, stepping up into midfield even, you know, playing those line-splitting passes that we all know he's so good at. Mickey van der Ven covering these wide channels too. That could work seriously nicely, especially if we're away from home at an opposition, say if we're at the Emirates or at Stamford Bridge or at Anfield, the Etihad, for example. This is a system that I would love to see at times next season. I think would platform us really well to go and get results and go and get big results. And Thomas Frank has been a manager who has always, he's got brilliant results at the Etihad. I remember that one where Tony scored in the 98th minute where they beat City when no one else had beaten City at the Etihad that season, apart from Spurs obviously, because we always do that. But I remember he's got great results against Arsenal at the Emirates in the past too, at Stamford Bridge against Chelsea. I think he's only lost once at Stamford Bridge in his career at Brentford, so in like 5-6 years, which is just utterly ridiculous. And this excites me. This really does excite me. Like I said, I think it will give a bit more freedom to Bentancur and Bergvall in this system as well. Bentancur has shown some in the past under Antonio Conte that he thrives in a two-man midfield in a three-back system. I think he'll absolutely love playing in this again, and I think that excites me quite a lot moving forward into this Thomas Frank era. The fact that we've got these two systems, the fact that we've got plenty of profiles who can come in and be adaptive and change games. I think that our squad is way better than people give it credit for, and I think that our squad is a really exciting squad. This isn't going to be like a massive rebuild under Thomas Frank. It's going to be a lot of the same squad next season. Like, again, I know I've banged on about it in this video, but profile better, platforms better, and you're almost going to see different versions of a lot of these players. And players like Matisse Tell, Wilson-Odobert, even the likes of Dominic Solanke, the likes of Kevin Danso, Udogie, Pedro Porro, Bergvall, Bentancur, players who were still good last season at points, but you're going to see them be even better this season, in my personal opinion. Like I said, people might say I'm going overboard on Frank, people might say I'm getting too excited, but I genuinely do believe that he really raises the floor of this squad. The ceiling of the squads, I think it's going to be really interesting to see. I think that might be my one concern in terms of how he deals with having all four competitions, how he deals with games in the Champions League where you're playing such high-level opposition. That's going to be really interesting to see, and I think we'll see this system quite a lot in the Champions League as well when we're playing those really high-level opposition. We're playing the likes of Bayern Munich, PSG, who else, Barcelona, for example. I think we'll see this quite a lot this season. I think it's going to be interesting to see how we match up against those real top-level teams, but I'm excited about the Thomas Frank era. I really am. I think you should be excited about it too. I think Frank's one of those managers where, because we're yet to see him make that step up, I think we're really yet to see the tactical ideas that he puts across and how he sort of the profiles that he loves in this squad. His starting 11 that he tends to go to every week is going to be really, really interesting. Who he favours in certain positions, who gets more game time, who gets less game time. It's going to be something that's going to be really interesting to follow, talk about, and see develop over the course of the next year. But yeah, I think I'm going to do a signings video next in terms of which signings I'd like to see to give Thomas Frank the best chance of competing on all four fronts next season. So if you want to see that video, let me know down in the comments below and tell me how excited you are about Thomas Frank. And yeah, thanks for watching. Plenty more videos coming out of this YouTube channel. I'm going to be far more consistent this season, and yeah, nice one.